Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I'm Ken Michaels for Ken Michaels Radio. And as you know, here on my channel, I interview a lot of people in the Beatle world. And we have a very special guest with us. All my guests are special. In this particular case, we have someone who actually did quite a bit of work for the Beatles and even going back to working at Nems offices for Brian Epstein. His name is Kevin Harrington. And just a few highlights before he says hello. What I have written down here is just a few things that he did in his career. He was hired at the age of 15 to work at Nems. He worked at the Saville Theatre next to Tony Bramwell. He was a right-hand man for Mal Evans. I think he's also very well known for being on the Apple Rooftop when the Beatles performed there. And he, in fact, held the handwritten lyrics up for Dig a Pony for John to sing as the band was performing it. I think for a lot of people, especially a lot of young males and older males, a big highlight of his career was when the singer Lulu fell asleep on his shoulders. And I'll get Kevin to talk about that. But not only that, to impress you even more, let me just take this book out. This is Ken Mansfield's most recent book, The Roof. It's all about the concert on the rooftop and everything leading up to it. As you can see right here, the man in the white suit, that is Ken Mansfield. And this is our guest for today, Kevin Harrington. Right next to Ken. And Kevin was also very fortunate that his photo was in the Beatles' White Album poster. Let me show this to you, this photo of George. And that's Kevin right behind George there. So I'm sure this was a big thrill for you, Kevin, but welcome to Ken Michaels Radio.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Let's just go back to the very beginning. Actually, before you started working at Nems, did you always have aspirations of, as a child working in the music business?
No, my earliest sort of thing of that was I had an uncle that used to tour South Africa. It's a one-man band. And I remember seeing a photo of him surrounded by a couple of native kids. And he's got the drum and the cymbals and it was called Bob's One-Man Band. I think, no, Uncle Bob's One-Man Band.
Uh-huh.
And he used to tour Africa, and that always fascinated me, but I never ever thought that one day I'd be actually touring myself or working in the music business.
So what led you to work at Nems?
I just left school, and I was working on a building site as an electrician's mate with my eldest brother. And during the winters, it's on a building site, it's cold, wet, damp, and miserable. I coming home one night, soaking wet, and looking out the bus window thinking, I really don't like this at all. And so I spoke to my second eldest brother, like the middle brother of the family. And he said, I'll find you a job. And he got out the Evening Standard, which was a local London paper,
of course,
which advertised jobs. And he went down the list and he said, here's one for you. Nems Enterprises are looking for an office boy. And I said, who's Nems Enterprises? And he said, well, that's Brian Epstein's company. And so that sounds all right, And so I applied and I got interviewed by Peter Brown. And lo and behold, I got the job. And I started on 24th of January, 1966. And that was at Argyle Street. I was working with two other office boys, both called Steve. One had a regular run in the mornings, which was to the Beatles fan club. And that's, taking all the fan letters there and etc., bringing them all back. And the other office boy, Steve, was, as he always let us know, he was Brian Epstein's personal office boy. And so he didn't do anything else except look after Mr. Epstein's private office in Hill House, I mean it was, and Chapel Street. He used to go in the mornings, and so it was like he did like this run every day. And yeah, so it was my job from the second day to go down to the Beatles fan club office every morning to drop off the mail and pick up mail, and it was great. It really was. Yeah, that was all right. It was a lot better than working on a building site.
I'm sure.
I had to wear a suit and tie, but that was,
When you were interviewed by Peter Brown, was there any kind of screening done? Did they not want to hire someone that would be a big Beatle fan? They might have been cautious about something like that.
Beatles weren't even mentioned. What I found out was that the Beatles were totally separate from Nems. That was always run from Hill House. So it was completely sort of separate, really. So my main thing was running around for Apple Productions or Tony Barrow, taking stuff down to Fleet Street and musical papers, or maybe running a few contracts around for the agents that were also in the building. See, Nems had Nems Agency, Nems Productions, and then there was Tony Barrow's office, and there was a couple of other people, like Dick. The lyricist, Black. You might have to remind me a few times, actually, Ken. I tell you what, his name will come back to me.
All right. Yeah.
So there was lots of running around to do, making tea, franking letters, making, this and that. Just loads of office boy stuff, really. And then Steve, Mr. Epstein's office boy, left. Steve Brendel, who was the guy I was working with, he worked for a band, and they part-time, so they went on the road. So it was left to me to be promoted, for want of a better word, to Mr. Epstein's personal office boy.
Okay.
So now I was the big cheese, so to speak, and that was good. That was all right. And I never hardly saw Mr. Epstein, because it was in his office there was only literally Wendy, his assistant, and the receptionist, and that was it. I mean, it was only two offices, on one floor, so it was very small. And then I'd go there in the morning. Then I'd get a bus up to Chapel Street, and was it Joanne? It's another name that's just gone. These names are sort of 50 odd years old, so
that's okay. Wendy Hansen, we know.
Wendy Hansen, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, she was lovely. And I always knew when Mr. Epstein was in the office, because as soon as I walked in, the receptionist would go, and I knew immediately. And the door was closed, so that was it. So it was creep in, and then creep out again. So, but I mean, the first time I actually met him was I was asked to meet him at a small theatre just off of Leicester Square, and so I went to the lobby, and I was waiting, and it was dark, and it was literally the first time that I'd been into a theatre during the day. And I just stood in the corner because I didn't know what to do, and it was dark lobby, so I was just standing there. Mr. Epstein walked through with somebody else, and he just, "Where's the boy?" And I just sort of croaked and went, "Yeah, I'm Mr. Epstein." And I just said, "Take this letter to be quick." And that was it. That was the first time I actually met him. And then consequently, I saw him a few times at Chapel Street, and then the next thing I know is that Peter Brown said to me, "Kevin, want to know, would you, Brian's You know, I never called him Brian. It was Mr. Epstein. So,
Hmm.
but he said, Mr. Epstein's having a party. Would you be willing to go and help on a Saturday night? So you never said no.
Of course.
Regardless.
Yeah.
It was, well, you just never said no, really.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I? So I was told to meet at Chapel Street on a Saturday morning. Brian, his chauffeur, was there waiting for me. So we drove down to Sussex, I think it was, in his Bentley. The sun shining, the roof's down. It's like, I can't believe, I'm driving in a Bentley here, and I got there and I got introduced, and he said, thank you for coming. And he said, what we want you to do is to stand on a road, on a corner. Mm-hmm. So it's like a dual carriageway that goes one way, and the turning off to his house. I had to stand on the corner, and there was a couple of balloons in the bushes, and just direct people who weren't too sure which way to go. So I stood there for like 2 hours. Now with red hair, it's a bit like a Belisha beacon. I'm in a suit and tie, and I'm in a, an island almost in between two roads, and you couldn't miss me, that's for sure.
Right.
The only person that stopped was Klaus. Well, Paddy Klaus and Gibson. He was with his wife, Christine Hargreaves.
Mm-hmm.
And they just sort of said, hello, Kevin, and then just drove on. 2 hours later, Brian, chauffeur, came and picked me up, took me back to the house, and just sort of everybody was kind of preparing for the evening party and stuff. And I met Terry Doran. I was introduced to Terry Doran for the first time, a wonderful man. Mm-hmm. And he took me upstairs, and he said, right up to he says, right, here we go. We'll show you how to roll a joint. It was me, Terry, and somebody else. And I just sat there rolling and rolling and rolling, just making piles of joints. And it was the first time that I'd really, really got, for want of a better word, stoned. And it was wonderful. The rest of the party is it's sort of gone in a flash, but there's certain things I remember,
Remember people who were there? Certain people that were there?
I mean, there was Scylla, Lulu, Klaus Gibson, the Beatles turned up. I mean, I remember John sitting under the kitchen table, just talking with somebody. It was just, it was crowded, and it was just fun. But I was young, really stoned for the first time, and I'm trying to take all of this in, not really understanding what I was looking at, except, didn't know anybody,
right?
Really, I was just this office boy that people knew as Kevin, but that was it. I knew Scylla from going to her house, for Mr. Epstein and picking up stuff. But I just sort of sat on the floor during the evening and just looked around in amazement at all of these people that, just dancing and just having a mad time. And I'm just so stoned. I was kind of like stuck to the floor. It was like one of them. It's just like, wow, this is weird. And then it kind of ended. And Klaus was going to give me...
Before you continue, did you get to know, you just mentioned Scylla, did you get to know any of the other Nems artists like Billy J. Kramer or Jerry Marsden?
Yeah, well, they always came into Apple, they came into Nems on a regular basis when they were in London. That was, so there'd always seemed to be always one of the artists coming in. And I'll give you a great one. This is one of those eye-popping moments. I was upstairs in the agencies section which is where Tony Barrow and Nems presentations was. And I'm standing there, and Jerry and the Pacemakers are in with his agent at the time, which was Alan Weisenberg. And I'm standing there and all of a sudden this guy walks in like a tramp, and he walks into Alan Eisenberg's office. And I could see, I felt there was something not quite right. The next thing, two of the Pacemakers get up and just beat the crap out of this guy, right? And there's blood coming from his mouth, and they pick him up and they slam through the doors to where the lift is. And then it just closes. And I'm just thinking, wow, I've just seen somebody beaten up. Then there was this almighty roar of laughter. And the three of them walked into Alan Eisenberg's office and just all going, yeah, got you, man, got you. And Alan Eisenberg is just sitting there, little dumpy guy, and he's just sitting there and he's quivering because he's never seen anything like this in his life. You know, this guy just came in for an interview and he's just beaten up by his band. It was just, it was just, wow.
That's
that
strange.
Was mad.
He was provoking trouble in some way? What was his problem?
He just wouldn't leave. And it was just one big setup. You know, the band had said to their mate, you know, hey, dress up like this, put a blood capsule in your mouth, come into Eisenberg's office, and we'll have a laugh. And we're going to beat you up, and we're going to drag you out.
Okay.
And that's what they did. And just poor Alan Eisenberg just didn't know what had hit him. It was just, it was funny as hell once I'd realised what was going on. But even my heart was pounding, thinking, wow, this is mad. You know? And it was just like, and then this roar of laughter was wonderful. It was, that was my introduction to really sort of the madness of how rock and roll could be, or the music business could be. Many silly stories.
Would you say you formed close friendships with any of these other artists at all?
No, Klaus, I think I did. Klaus was, you know, Klaus was kind of nice, you know. And I would say the nearest I got, I suppose, was the Bee Gees, when Brian, or when Mr. Epstein sort of went into partnership with
Stigwood. Yeah.
Right. Well, the Bee Gees would come in all the time, and they were basically my age. You know, and so, you know, got to know them quite well, because I went to a lot of their record. You know, when a single comes out, there's like a press thing, and so I did a lot of that. Did a lot of free drinking and partying. That was So I got to know them quite well, I must admit. They were,
Did you think?
See, the thing at Nems, everybody was always friendly.
Right.
You know, that was the beauty of it. Everybody was just happy, it seemed. I'm sure, you know, it was a good place to work.
Did you get a lot of perks? Like, were you able to go to concerts for free, or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Excuse me. Yes. The first one I went to was Gene Pitney, backed by Sounds Incorporated at, I think it was the Astoria. So there was a few little perks, nothing great, you know, I must admit, but I think the perk was the job. You know, the rest of it was just an added bonus in a way. You know, it was all, you know, these gigs were always on like a Saturday. So I don't remember going to many, but I do remember that was my first, was Gene Pitney, then with Sounds Incorporated, because they used to come into Nems as well. So, you know,
I'm wondering why Gene Pitney?
For some unknown reason, I just remember it was, you know, I'm sure there was loads of other artists, but I just remember it was, you know, like Gene Pitney, for some unknown reason. If I saw a flyer, I'd go, oh, yes, I remember that and that and that, but I don't. All I remember is it was a Gene Pitney show, one assumes he was headlining, you know.
Right.
But yeah, so there was occasionally good perks like
Mm.
that, but also, you know, the record, you know, the record, whatever you call it, you know, evenings, you know, of promotion. The record promotion parties were always good. They were always good. But that was free booze, you know,
Yeah.
and when you're 16, 17, you know, that's all right. You know.
You know, every now and then somebody will ask a person who's doing an interview, or the interviewer will ask the question, did you know someone was going to be big before it happened? I don't necessarily like that, but I will approach this differently. Since you observed the Bee Gees so early on, did you see any inclination in there that you thought that these guys would be something special?
No, but that wasn't my mindset.
Hmm.
You know, to be honest, I just lived for the now,
Right.
not for the future. And they were just another set of artists that I'd come into contact at Nems, is what it was. So I never, you know, never even thought about that. But the amount of singles that they had, you know, the mining thing and all of that. So they were kind of growing even then.
Hmm.
But, you know, I never thought, oh, okay, you know, in 50 years' time, they're going to be massive or whatever, you know. You just don't think like that. Not in my position. You know, I wasn't management. I was just an
Right.
employee.
Hmm.
You know, I never had that vision.
Okay. They probably, I'm guessing they probably admired you because you looked at this as a job and you probably weren't a very starstruck person.
No, that was the thing. I wasn't. You
Hmm.
know, it was more fascination rather than, you know, wow, I'm looking at people, I'm meeting people that I've seen off the telly.
Hmm.
It didn't enter my head really. You know, it was I don't know. It's it's strange because you're working. It was like with Scylla.
Hmm.
I mean, I used to go maybe to her flat once a week, maybe twice a week, uh, which was just opposite the BBC. And it was just normal. It was just, you know, I'd knock on the door, either Bobby would answer, and or the first time Scylla answered, you know, she just went, "Oh, hello, Kevin. Oh, I love your hair." You know, and it was like, you know, yeah, cool, you know, and then you're invited in, you know, just while they're just finishing off a letter or
Hmm.
getting something, you know. So it's not, you're there. It's you're not starstruck. You're just there doing a job. Okay, thank you, and you're going on to the next job.
Hmm.
You know, and so it just became natural to me. You know, just being around musicians. It was just something that I did. You know, when Scylla was doing cabaret down at the Savoy, you know, I would go there and drop something off for her from Mr. Epstein, or if Nems Productions, like with Tony Bramwell was doing some of that, with Vivian Moynihan, you know, I would just go down there and I would just see dancers practicing or listening to Scylla singing
Hmm.
or doing a sound check or whatever. It just became natural. There was no starstruckness at all. It was just, hey, here you go. Okay. Yet again, on to the next one. Thanks. I'll, you know, back to the office. So you don't really have time to be starstruck, I don't think.
Right. And
Well,
when
I did.
you know, this is part of your everyday life, you just come to realize these are regular people.
Yeah, yeah. Except with a weird sense of humor sometimes, like Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Hmm.
You know, yeah, you know, there was a lovely Sounds Incorporated roadie, Johnny Fanning. Now he's a Liverpudlian. Now
Hmm.
he was fantastic. He wanted to take me on the road because I this was at what was it? It might have been when they were played at the Saville. Because he could see that I was, a bit fascinated with it. It was, and then in between shows, we'd go to the pub, and have a couple of pints. And yeah, one day he just said, why don't you just be a roadie, come on the road with us? And I spoke to Laurie McCaffrey, who was the receptionist and telephonist at Nems.
Mm-hmm.
And she just said, no, you're a bit young, So I said, okay, But it was just nice. They were just nice people. They were good fun. They were good people to be around. So yeah, I was happy.
I'm sure you were.
Yeah.
A lot of people watching this would be extremely happy to have been in your shoes. But when was the first time you got to meet the Beatles? Was it at Brian's party? And is it safe to assume that you were a big Beatles fan?
The first time I saw them. I didn't actually meet them. It was the first time I saw them at Mr. Epstein's housewarming party.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I actually got to meet them was, in any sort of meaningful way, I think, was sadly after Mr. Epstein died, which I'm going forward a bit here, but after Mr. Epstein died, and then they did the Magical Mystery Tour.
Mm-hmm.
I was still working out, sort of, doing my circuit. You see, I was still involved with all the Beatles stuff, like letters or whatever, rather than Nems Enterprises. It was still kind of, I was still on the Beatles side of it, even though Mr. Epstein wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did most of the moving film from studios to cutting rooms, to viewing theaters. So I was running around at that point doing a lot of just film stuff.
Did you get to see a lot of the processing and the outtakes and what was taken out?
Yeah. That was it. That's one of the abiding memories is, being in a cutting room and just watching all of this going on, waiting for a cut, so I could then rush down to Wardour Street or wherever it was to a viewing theatre. Then that's when I first really met them. I was invited in by Neil, because I, just sort of hand over and then go, and then Neil said, "Hey, come on in, come and look, see what we're doing," which was, what Neil was like. He was nice like that.
Right.
And that's when I first remember actually being up close with the Beatles, and sitting down in the back, while they're all there. You're an office boy, you're just sort of in awe of all of this, and you're just sitting at the back watching all these rushes. So they got to know me, or they got to know the hair, I suppose. It's the only way I can describe it.
Hey, you stood out.
I stood out. That's right. I was the redhead. So they got to know me. And then once they started Apple, I wanted to move to Apple. See, Peter Brown had gone to Apple. Derek Taylor had gone to Apple. Tony Bramwell had gone to Apple. So this nucleus started Apple. And I knew Neil and Mal from various times of going to their flat for Mr. Epstein with tickets and visas and all of that stuff. So I got to know them, reasonably well, considering I was just an office boy.
Yeah.
And so I said to Mr. Brown, I want to join Apple. And he said, well, no, because I quit at one point. I wanted to leave at one point. You see, there's stories that I, go back, like the Saville Theatre.
Right.
The reason I went to the Saville Theatre was because I decided I'd been an office boy for too long. And so I handed in my notice. And one day coming down the stairs at Chapel Street, I met Mr. Epstein on the stairs, and he said, Kevin, I hear you want to leave us. Well, don't. Look around the office and see if there's anything you want to do. You know, so I had my pick of each department, but the only one that I really seemed interested in was the production side, which was Vivian Moynihan.
Right.
So it was decided by the powers that be that I could become Vivian Moynihan's personal assistant, which would mean that I'd have to learn shorthand and typing. So I enrolled there's an old school, I think it's still in America as well, an old typing and secretarial school. I can't remember what it's called now. And about 3 days before I was meant to start this course, I was thinking, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be dictated to and type. And then Saville sort of started, and Tony Bramwell, who was running it for Mr. Epstein, said, come down on a Sunday and give us a hand. And the first Sunday was the Four Tops. And nice. So I sort of, you know, just almost sort of learned the ropes and just did a bit of running around, getting tea, you know. And that night, at the end of the afternoon sort of setup, I went home, and thinking that I wasn't needed in the evening, I didn't go back. And the next day, Monday, Tony Bramwell said, here, where were you last night? I said, well, I didn't think you'd need me, so I stayed at home. And he just said, oh, that's effing silly. I won't swear on your show, but I'll bleep. He said, that's bleeping silly.
Yeah.
Don't ever do that again. And so from there on in, every Sunday, I would get up real early and just rush down to the Saville Theatre at 10 o'clock. And I loved it. This empty theatre, the expectation, the stage crew, who were all unionized, you know, in those days, took a liking to me. And so I'd help them putting up the curtains and all of that. And so, yeah, that was a good experience. That was really, really nice. And I didn't miss a show after that.
That must have been amazing, because Jimi Hendrix performed something like 3 times, I think 3 times. The Bee Gees, Cream.
Yeah. Georgie Fame, a lot. It was great. It really was. It was an eye-opener, and I loved it to death. And let me tell you a story. This is what really turned me on to all of this. One night at the end of the show, as most of the stuff was packed up and gone, I went to the front of the stage and I just looked out. I'm getting it now. The back of my neck just raised up, and I felt the presence of 1,800, 2,000 people. I felt it, and it hit me, and the theatre was empty. And it was like, wow. I mean, even now, just thinking about that one moment gives me goose pimples, because it was a defining moment in my life. That energy that permeates a building from a great show, and the atmosphere still lives in a theatre. I'm sure lots of other people have experienced this.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just, wow. I'll never, ever, ever forget that feeling, because just the hairs stand up and you just go, oh.
And you think about the performers who had already played there, thinking you're on the same stage as them.
No, that wasn't even that. It wasn't even that. It was the whole. It was just everything. Looking out into an empty theatre and just feeling the power of the audience that are no longer there.
Right.
It was pretty phenomenal, I must admit. Yeah, I'll never never lose that feeling. That was wonderful.
Before we get to the Beatles, which I'm sure everybody wants me to talk about
Yeah.
the Beatles, but I mean, you weren't there when the Beatles watched Jimi Hendrix. You weren't there that day.
Yeah.
Right? You were?
Oh yeah, I never missed a show.
Okay.
At all. Except for the Four Tops, I never missed a show.
Okay. So did you
But
see?
you still got to remember, I was still sort of on the periphery.
Hmm.
You know, I was still just the redhead that's, you know, hanging around waiting to be told what to do or asked to do something.
Hmm.
You know, so oh yeah, no, I remember seeing them there, but you know, there was no contact.
Okay. Because Paul always brings up that concert. in all of his concerts, because he played Sergeant Pepper a few days after the album came out, and that just blew him away, and that impressed the band, obviously. So, what did you think of watching Jimi Hendrix for those shows?
To be honest, it wasn't really my music. I know this is sacrilege, but I wasn't really into that at that time. You know, yeah, it was good and it was a spectacle, but you know, not being musically inclined, you know, it was just a good show, but that was it. It was, wow, you know, it was just a good show.
What kind of music were you into at that point?
Well, this is a weird thing, because I was into the Beatles music in the youth club days, but I was also into Motown. And this is what always kills me about going home, and I still don't know why I did it on the Four Tops, because I love the Four Tops.
Yeah.
You know, and fortunately I did manage to see them about 74. They were in this little club in somewhere like, I don't know, Philly or somewhere, just this. And it was, I was working with Wishbone, and we went, and they were playing in the theatre, and we'd finished the show, and then it was, oh, the Four Tops are playing in this club, let's go and see them. Yeah, so we all went down there. But this club is empty. You know, there was about 6 people, other people in the club, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You know, I'm watching the great Four Tops on stage, and there's 6 of us, 7 of us from Wishbone, and 6 other punters. You know, and I mean, I had a great time, and we was dancing and singing, and you know, they came over at the end of their set. But yeah, it was weird. It was
That's
weird.
baffling, really is.
Yeah, but they weren't. That's when they'd lost that whatever, you know, that star appeal at that time. You know, as most bands do. You know, you can play stadiums, and then 2 years later, you can be playing back down in clubs. And if you're a musician, you'll play in a club. You know, you want to play. That's what you do. That's what I always learned. You know, a musician is a musician. They will play anywhere.
Right. And a true musician is not affected by, you know, whether or not you sell out or not. So.
Well, I mean, they are affected, but that's just because of the bottom line. I mean, every musician wants to play to as many people as they can.
Sure.
But when they see somebody that's turned up, then they're turning up for them.
Right.
So they will play for them, whether it's 10 or 200 or 2,000. You know, that's a proper musician. You know, and that's what I like about musicians.
Sure. So moving on from later Magical Mystery Tour, when did you start working more with the Beatles in the studio? You were talking about Apple, but you were there during the White Album sessions, weren't you? You were witnessing some of those sessions.
Well, I managed to get the job as office boy at Apple. Peter Brown, getting back to this story, Peter Brown, I sometimes go up in a tangent to try to explain.
That's fine.
You know,
so do I.
So I do apologize to all of your fans if I waffle on a bit, but there's a lot of waffling to be done. He eventually said yes, you know, okay, because I explained to him that they needed me because I knew everybody. you know, hey, I know everybody, you know, I know what you need. And so I got that gig, and that's when I first met Derek Taylor. Lovely, lovely man. But yeah, and then I'd go to Paul's to drop letters off up in St. John's Wood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then one day I'm just at the door and he says, "Hi, Kevin, because that's when I really get to know them, is at Apple, because they're coming in almost every day."
Right.
Right. You know, this is in Wigmore Street.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right. And so I'm getting to know them more because John and Yoko comes in, George, you know, they all come in. So, and I'm there sort of making them tea right from the get-go. So they're getting to know me more. You know, I'm dropping stuff off at John's house or the flat where he got busted. You know, see, there's another thing there. But anyway, so I go to Paul's and I drop this letter off. He says, "Hey, how are you getting back to the office?" I said, "I'm getting on a bus." He says, "Hang on, I'll get my coat and I'm going to come with you." So all of a sudden, there I'm walking down the street with Paul McCartney, and I'm standing at a bus stop with Paul McCartney. And then the bus comes and I get on the bus with Paul McCartney, and it's like, wow, this is, you know, and I'm just grinning like a Cheshire cat. You know, I can't believe who I'm walking and sitting on a bus with. You know, this is just wow. And so that was, that was the real first time I guess that, you know, I suddenly thought, And then one day Mal came into the office and said, "Hey, Kevin, we're just starting this album at EMI. Could you do me a favor? And could you go and get some sandwich stuff, like a couple of bags of, you know, lettuce, bread, butter, cheese, you know, no meat, you know, and drop it off to me at EMI." So I said, "Yeah, you know, do that." Get there at 6:30, knock on the door. Mal eventually comes to the door and I give him a thing and he says, "Thank you." And I say good night. And then I go home and he goes into the studio with his bags. And then the next day, I didn't see Mal. And I just thought, do they need anything else? So I just went out and got some more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like another half bag full just of fresher stuff.
Right.
Like tomato, you know, the stuff that I, in my naivety, thought might go off in a day in the fridge. You know, and so at 6:30, I went down to the studios, knocked on the door, security man came, you know, "Can I speak to Mal?" And he went and got Mal. And I said, "Mal, you know, I brought you some," because I didn't know if you needed any more, but I brought you some more, you know, a top up. And he just said, "No, I don't need that." And I went, "Oh." He said, "But come on in." So he took, now I'd been to the studios many times, but I'd walked through the front door and stopped at the security desk. Right. And that was the limit to an office boy. You stop at the security desk, you pick up whatever thing you've got to pick up, or you drop it off, and then you go. And I'd always spotted these double doors just to the right, and I'd always seen people in white coats going in and out. And yeah, so Mal took me through these white doors. You know, this 6:30 at night, there's really nobody in the studio at all. So we go down the corridor, we go down the stairs and into the kitchen. We drop the stuff off, and he says, "Hey, come on, I'll come into the studio." Now, I knew that to go into the studio was a no-no for an employee. You know, that was, I could almost call it hallowed ground. You know, Laurie McCaffrey once said, "Nobody ever goes to the studio, ever." You know, and there I was walking behind Mal into number 2 studio, and I was like, oh. And I started to get really nervous because I didn't know, you know. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything. And I saw this big black box on these metal legs, and I just stood behind it. So I was shaking because this was, this was like, oh, this was totally off the wall. And I'm just, watching Mal and the band, and they're, doing whatever that, and it's like, oh wow, oh wow.
Uh-huh.
And then I got so nervous and just felt so out of place. But when Mal came up to me after about 10 minutes, I said, Mal, I'm going to go now. Which he most probably would have asked me to leave anyway. But I just said, I've got to go now. This is... And I sort of walk to the door, and I go home and, whoa. The next day,
do you remember what they were working on that day? What song they were working on?
No idea. Okay. Got no idea. It was what I discovered was, for the first half an hour in the studio, everybody's, just getting their act together,
warming up,
or, Ringo's playing the piano, or, Paul's doing this or that. It's, and then the next day, Mal just came in and said, hey, how would you like to come and work with me and set the equipment up for the boys? I just said yes. He said, right, we'll go down there at 6 o'clock. And so I went down to the studio with Mal at 6 o'clock, and he said, I'll show you what to do. You just sort of take care of the equipment, and and we'll work it out. And so I went down, and they're there, just doing whatever. And I went and hid behind this speaker. It was a monitor. I found out that this big black box was a monitor.
Right.
And so I'm standing there. I just, Mal's doing his thing with the boys, and I'm just sort of standing there, and I'm, looking, seeing what's happening. And then George is just sitting on the floor, just playing his guitar, and he goes, hey, Kevin, come over here. I just sit down. So I just sat cross-legged in front of George, and we spoke for about 15 minutes, and, just to get to know me, and, and it turns out that we both used to deliver items I used to deliver bread on a cart, on a push bike with a basket on the front. Well, George used to do that with meat for a butcher's, if I remember rightly. So we had something in common. So, and it was just, everybody was really nice and, welcome, and, and that was my introduction. It was after 15 minutes with George, I felt a lot easier. And then Mal just showed me what to do, and, where to place the stuff, and, and so the next day got there at 6:30, just set up as best as I could remember, and then set up Ringo's drum kit as best as I could remember. And, Mal kind of finished it off, and then somebody would walk in, John would walk in with Yoko, go and get a cup of tea. And then, George would walk in and go and get him a cup of tea. And then just eventually, it was wonderful. It just kind of relaxed into it. After about 2 weeks, I knew what I had to do, and so I would get there before Mal and set up, and that was the nice thing. And after about 2 weeks or so, instead of them going, Mal, can you do this? It was, Kevin, can you do this? And that was like, yeah.
You've been elevated.
I've been elevated. Yeah, I'm allowed to do stuff for them without Mal. Excuse me.
I'm curious, because to me, a lot of what you were doing there is what I would associate an engineer to do. Weren't you involved with the placement of microphones, where that should be, with the drum set and stuff like that, or just?
No, you basically, I was a roadie. Now you see, if you the setup was like with Neil and Mal. Like Neil was the management, right? So he'd deal with all the management stuff, you know, where Mal was the equipment.
Right.
They both looked after the band together, but they're separated by Mal doing the equipment, Neil doing, you know, the management stuff. You know, it could be anything from Ringo saying, I need this, Neil, you know, can you sort these tickets out? Or, you know, John saying, I, you know, can you do this car or whatever, you know? So Neil would basically deal with the office and Mal would deal with the equipment. Well, when Apple started, Neil became basically the head of Apple. Right. So he wasn't going into the studio. So Mal took over Neil's role and I took over Mal's role. We still worked together, but it would be, you know, Mal would sort of go, okay, we're in studio 1 tomorrow because of whatever, you know, so the gear's got to go into studio 1. So, okay. So that's the sort of thing, you know, and then because I would go to the music shops and get the strings and the plectrums and drumsticks and any other little odds and sods that were needed.
Right.
Right. So, you know, we were, you know, we worked together, you know, just looking after the boys, but it was a kind of separation. So, you know, you'd be, excuse me, if there was somebody else in the studio the day after, in studio 2, then the equipment had to get packed away. So that would get put in the corner. And then the next night I would go in at 6 and then I would set all the gear up. And then the studio engineers would come down and mic it all up.
Okay.
All right. So, you know, we were separate, but, you know, they had their job, I had my job, which is basically making sure the boys had what they needed to make music. Now,
did you get to observe them recording their songs, or did you just leave when your job was done?
No, as soon as I'd set up, I would wait for them to all turn up and make sure that they all had their tea, you know, and then you sort of make sure that, you know, and then it could take sort of like 40 minutes, you know, for them all to turn up. You know, George might be delayed by traffic or whatever, you know. And so you would just literally just be in the studio while they're goofing around.
Right.
You know, having fun, talking about the day, you know, or we'd be reading the papers or, you know, so I was there from the word go until the last one left in the evening, in the morning, you know, or whatever time they left, 6 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, it didn't matter. So I was there before them and I was there after they left. So I saw everything that, you know, that was the thing. I saw how, you know, it was a revelation to see, you know, Paul had come in and, you know, it'd say, hey, John, you know, what do you think of this? And da-da-da-da-da. And then, and then that would kind of start and John would get his guitar or whatever and these chords. And then, so I saw a build up of a song.
That's an amazing experience.
It is an amazing experience. You know, you know, while they're sort of working out their chord riffs, you know, Ringo would be sitting down doing, you know, working out rhythms. You know, and I just sat next to it. I just sort of sat away from them and just waited. And when they started recording, when they'd actually got the whole song near enough how they felt it should be at that time, that's when I could sort of go, okay, I'm going to go and get a cup of tea and have a smoke. You know, I didn't need to be in the studio then. Once they were playing, you know, then I could, well, go and get a cup of tea and have a smoke. I couldn't really do anything else. You know, and so as long as I was in earshot, as long as Mal was in earshot, you know, as long as one of us was in earshot, that was the most important thing. You know, as you progress during the night, you know, the red light goes on and then the red light's on for maybe half an hour because they just keep the tape rolling. Let's do it again, blah, blah, blah. You know, and so when the red light goes out, you think, okay, you know, it's been an hour and a half, so let's go and make him some tea, because they'll be up in the control room listening back. And so you know, take care of them while they're up there, you know.
Were there any specific songs that you remember just watching it take shape that you found to be the most fascinating?
No, I remember Blackbird, but that was just Paul in the studio. If I remember, there was like a cardboard box. I had to get him a cardboard box, and I think we tried putting a spare drum pedal, trying to fix that up somehow. So, because it's Blackbird singing, do you know what I mean? So I remember that one, but it's all a mash because I spent 5 months, I think it was, that album, you know, a life-changing 5 months for me, you know. So yeah, you know, you kind of remember it all, but you don't remember any of it, if you know what I mean. It was like the first thing I remember was Number 9. That was the first thing they were doing when I went down there.
Okay.
Right. And I do remember coming away thinking, this is crap. You know, Number 9, this is not Beatles. You know what I mean? So, but
you would have just seen John and Yoko in the studio with that, and George Harrison did some work on Revolution Number 9, and George Martin, but you wouldn't have seen the other Beatles, right?
I don't really remember. You see, it's such a mishmash. You know, I did 3 albums with them.
Right.
You know, as I said, like, it was 5 months, so it's all just in one. It's just like one massive experience. You see, not being a super fan or that sort of thing, where I'm going, oh, this was interesting, right? You know, this was interesting. Oh, that was clever. I was just living at the day. Whatever the day turned up, that's what I did.
Did you sense any change in the atmosphere, any tension during the White Album, as has been told through the years? And also, there were songs that were recorded separately, like Paul would be working on Blackbird in one studio, and another Beatle would be working on another song in another studio, or finishing up the song. So, you know, you observed.
Well, you would basically, you're just in 2 studios. You're just,
right.
You know, it's all you're doing. You know, I'm just walking from one studio to the other, you know, making sure everything's all right. You know, it's like when excuse me, after they've been in the studio for about 3-4 hours, you know, and they're upstairs listening back, then, you know, you clear up the detritus, you know, the empty cups, and you empty the ashtrays, and you you know, try and tidy up the leads a little bit, and, you know, and so you're just there doing roadie stuff, you know. Is the only way I can describe it. You know, I've listened to the albums. Excuse me, sorry. I've listened to the albums, and not for a long time. And sometimes some things stick out, like Bungalow Bill, being asked to sing on Bungalow Bill in the chorus. You know, I remember that because I was asked to sing, and I hated it. You know, I've never really, you know, I've never been a great singer. So your one just sort of deepens one's voice so it's not as loud, and you just sort of sing.
Right.
I was asked to, you know, at one point on some song that they were all standing around clapping, you know, and hey, Kevin, come over and clap. Well, I was so paranoid that I was going to mess it up, but I just said, I can't do it. You know, I tried, and, you know, and it was just the nerves, you know, I couldn't I didn't feel as though I could clap in time, but I knew I could, but it was.
You're on the spot.
Nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah, too nervous,
Mhm.
so I just went, I can't do this. Even though I did, it was,
When you listen to the continuing story of Bungalow Bill now, can you hear yourself in there in that mix?
yeah, I think I can. No, I don't know if that's just psychological, but if there's a very deep voice somewhere in there, well,
Okay.
that's me. I can. I don't know if it's psychological that I can hear it, or if it's actually,
Mhm.
it is that distinctive. I don't know, but it still goes on in my head that it's, it's oh. So yeah, and let's take Maxwell's Silver Hammer. One night I've set up and everything else, and I'm sitting there, and it gets to 7 o'clock in the evening, and I think John said, "Where's Mal?" Or somebody said, "Where's Mal?" I don't know, And then about 10 minutes later, he comes walking in with a massive anvil.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, and I recognize what it is, and I'm just saying to myself, bleep, where do you get an anvil? Just poof. And he proceeded, Mal was a strong man, and he just put it down, and they mic'd it up, and he went bing bing and got a sound check. And then I think Ringo came and did the beats. But yeah, it was just wow. Where?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And so you learn these little things, and there
At
is a
any
way to get something.
at any time, you said you worked on 3 albums there. Did they ever ask for feedback from you?
Oh no.
Just wondering. I mean, if you're there on a day-by-day basis, they're
Yeah. Oh
getting to
no.
know you better.
Yeah. No. It's I'm sure there's yeah. No. There's no. Don't remember ever being asked for my opinion, but they were all great songs except for number 9. So and I could sing them by the end of the second night. That was a funny thing, being able to sing a Beatles song before it's even on record. That was,
Sure.
walking through these corridors at night, just humming a Beatles tune at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
It was pretty special.
Was there
It
anything
really
you observed about when Yoko was with John and how the other Beatles reacted to it, or
um
and Yoko sang on your song, Kevin?
yeah, I've got to be honest, Ken. I don't really remember that much animosity.
Mhm.
But what you have to also remember is that I wasn't sitting there every single moment of the day. This is, the most striking thing for me about Yoko was I was in the toilet and standing next to John, and I finished first, and I walked out, and bit of a shock at sort of midnight, and there's this little white figure standing just outside the toilet, and it was like, oh Yoko, and you just sort of walk on. But that freaked me out a bit. And then of course the bed turned up,
Right.
and that was, so I was a chambermaid as well as a roadie. Right. I had to make the bed, and if we had to clear the studio, I had to clear the bed. And then the next day I'd come down and I'd make the bed, and then put out the equipment. So I didn't really like that, but hey, there was animosity. I think everybody knows that,
Mhm.
But did I personally sort of think to myself, wow, yeah, I think I might have done once or twice, but I think I do remember, but it's kind of something which just sits in the back of the head really and doesn't come out. I like
Okay.
to think of good times.
Sure. Absolutely. Move on to the Get Back sessions. Twickenham Studios. You were there every day for that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've always heard that they were not too happy working there. They had to get up early in the morning for that. It's,
At Twickenham.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was awful, to be honest. That really was awful. Even I could feel for them then. Because just remember, you see, I think we've done 2 albums by then. Haven't we? Abbey Road came after Double White album.
Well,
And then
yes.
we did Let It Be, but Abbey Road was released after Let It Be. So
No, Let It Be was released after Abbey Road. That's okay.
Yeah.
But the stuff from Let It Be was recorded
yeah.
before Abbey Road. That's all.
Okay. Is that right? See, thank you. You know, this is why I dread talking to people that know more about the Beatles than I do. But anyway.
But you were there.
I know.
Were there. Everybody would trade places with that.
It's helpful to know that I'm speaking to somebody that knows what they're talking about. Yeah, it was just a big, massive studio. It was cold. There was no atmosphere. You know, it was just, and then they're surrounded, or it seemed, you know, they're surrounded by full of people that they don't know. You know, that is not a great way to make an album. You know, and you could feel that it was cold. It was not good. You know, even I felt that. You know, it was it was the wrong place. It should never have happened. Should never have happened, I must admit. But you know, hindsight's a good thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, I'm told to set up equipment somewhere. I set it up. You know.
Were you witness to George Harrison walking out?
Yeah. But you see, that was the other thing. You know, I was in order to keep out the way, I was sitting on a flight case. It seemed like 100 miles away. You know, it was so far removed from them, you know, that I couldn't hear anything that was said anyway. You know, at least at Abbey Road, you know, I was close enough to, you know, listen to conversations and be involved in some conversations, and you know, but that was just like I was on the periphery, you know, and then I just saw George get up and go, you know. Okay, you know, what's you know, what's going on, you know. And so yeah.
Did you witness any happiness at all during Twickenham, or was it all misery? Because they say Twickenham was really, you know, that's when it was miserable. And then once they moved to Apple, everything changed. Once you brought Billy Preston in, it changed the whole mood of the sessions.
Yeah, it did. You know, no, Twickenham was just miserable. You know, it really was, you know. It was not very good at all. Yeah, that was a shame. But I did get to drive Paul's Aston Martin, so that was all right. That was one bright spark for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when you moved on to Apple, that must have been, you know, a joyous experience.
Yes, it was.
You know, I'm figuring that so much of what we're going to see in this Peter Jackson film will probably get more of the Apple film footage than we will of Twickenham.
I hope so, because you'll get a lot more sense of the joyousness of the Beatles recording. I think, you know, the original film was a bit of I didn't like it really, because it didn't portray any good stuff. You know, it just seemed to be a sensationalized look at the Beatles splitting up.
Right.
Whereas in reality, there was some great times there. You know, it was some good fun times. And I think when people see that, see the next song coming out, they'll realize what a joy the Beatles had with each other, you know, and sort of recording.
Yeah, you need to have some sort of sense of balance between the tough times and the happy times.
Yeah.
And you know, when a few years ago I watched Let It Be for the first time in a long time, and I didn't see it as such a depressing film. To me, this was just reality of what a band goes through. And I've always thought that the argument that Paul and George had in the film was overblown. You know, there are bands that go through that on a regular basis. It's not a big deal. It's just that these are the Beatles that we're talking about.
Yeah, and that is the thing. You're right. You know, so many bands have these arguments, these discussions, you know, these talks, and then it's just gone. You know, it's on to the next song. You know, and then that's how it is. But unfortunately, with the Apple situation and Alan Klein and all of that, then that was a different kettle of fish. You know, but as soon as they stopped discussing that and went back to being the Beatles musicians, you know, that was a different matter. You know, they went back to how I remember them on the Double White album. You know, just full of joy and, you know, good musicians playing.
Right.
You know, that's the thing.
Were you witness to them discussing their business problems, or was it just the music you got?
No, I was witness. You know, I was privy to some of it. Sure, you know, I couldn't fail to be. You know, where certainly at Abbey Road, you know, it was quite often sort of they'd have meetings during the day at Apple, and then it would spill over into the studio at night. And so, you know, I'd hear, you know, the same arguments really, you know, near enough. You know, so yeah, no, I heard a lot. You know, I don't talk about it, but I heard a lot. You know, but once they started writing the songs and, you know, getting their ideas across and started picking up their instruments, then they just fell back into being the Beatles. You know, not a warring little sort of factions, really.
That's what Ringo has said many, many times. Once they concentrated on the music, they blocked out everything else, whatever problems they were having. It was like heaven. You know, they were just so in sync with each other once they focused on the music.
Yeah,
so,
it's true. Oh, so we have something in common.
I mean, Ringo has said this like a mantra, you know, in recent years, and I believe him, you know.
Yeah, no, you should believe him because it's absolutely true. It's once the music started, they were the Beatles. You know, and that was the joy. That was the fun. You know, you know, to watch Ringo in the beginning of an evening, sort of coming in and playing a few bars on the piano with his one wrist holding the other, doing that. You know, I don't know if he still does it, but he used to, you know, bash away on the keyboards. It was great fun. You know, those sort of early evening greeting sessions were great. They really were. You know, they were real good fun. You know, and then the music would start.
Yeah. Did you get any sense at all from the arguments that they had, balancing that with when they were concentrating on the music, that this was a band that was about to break up, or you tried not to think about it too much?
No, there was. I never got any inclination, but I didn't know them as well as Mal. Now Mal certainly did get an inclination that there was something not right. It's one night we were, well, I can't remember, we might have been upstairs sitting underneath the dog, and he said, "Oh, I don't like the way these arguments are going." You know, he didn't like that because he was seeing a different side of it, his boys. You know, because Mal was just, it was Mal's vocation. The Beatles were Mal's vocation. You know, that's what he was there for. You know, I eventually, it became my vocation. You know, I didn't do anything for 2 odd years
Mhm.
except look after the Beatles. I was there 24 hours a day if need be, so, I mean, I even lived with George for 5 months, I think it was, at Friar Park. So
That must have been an experience.
that was an experience. Yeah. George just came in one night, just one evening, and he just said, "Hey, Kevin, just moved into a house in Henley, and it's a bit big, and, do you want to come and stay for a bit and just sort of make up the numbers?" And I said, "Yeah," because you never said no. I said, "Yeah."
Mhm.
He said, "Okay, we'll bring a bag tomorrow and we'll go home." And that was, I think it was 4 months, 5 months. I'm not too sure. And date wise, it was when the Krishnas turned up that I left. But yeah, no, that was fantastic. That was unbelievable. There was Terry, Doran, Patty, George, and myself in this massive mansion with, not derelict, but it was certainly run down.
Yeah.
And my first night, Terry had, not even any beds were made. They didn't have any beds. I think they had George's and Terry had one, but that was it. So they put in a mattress on the floor in the library, right? And a sleeping bag. So that was where I slept for the first 2 or 3 nights until a bed turned up. But that was creepy as hell. Because, you're stoned and everything else. And, I walk, I first of all, you go up the drive and it's like, oh, God. It's like a Hammer horror house,
Right.
Is it needed the sort of white lightning, and it would have been, whoa. And then this huge hall, which is kind of dark and, yeah. And, okay, this is your bed, and like really stoned and had a couple of drinks, and there's huge Gothic windows and just the lawn and these trees, but you couldn't really see it because it was dark. But Henley was behind the trees, so the trees were like silhouetted. Right. So, and there's like this wind blowing away on these trees, so all this shadow on the walls, and it's like, whoa, this is yeah, this is spooky.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was fabulous time.
Now that was such a giant house. Did you get to look at all the rooms?
Oh, every single room. Every single room.
How many were there? Are there?
Well, I've heard different numbers. But I would have said there was only about 60 odd.
Only.
I've heard somewhere that there was 120. And I still can't make out where that 120 comes from. I would say it was near a 60 odd. Because upstairs on the top floor, there was all like the servants' quarters. So they're small rooms.
Yeah.
But then you've got the gallery, which has the big rooms, the guest rooms and all of that. You see, you look at the house and you think, well, that's going to have hundreds of rooms. But in reality, the ballroom took up almost half of the ground floor. Or not half, but, like a quarter of the ground floor. So that's, and then it was wonderful. And there's the big fireplace, massive oak fireplace, and then the wonderful window above it. And I can't remember what was depicted, stained glass window. And I can't remember what the depiction was.
Right.
There must have been some monks there somewhere. But one night, Terry, myself, and I think it was Greg, George's cousin, who had come over from Florida. I think it was. George and Patty were out, and so we're sort of sitting this massive fire in this huge room with a gallery going round, and Terry's talking about seeing the ghost and all of this stuff, and it's like, oh God, and then Greg goes upstairs to his bedroom to get something, and Terry had rigged up a light outside on the like a low wall to shine up into so you could sort of see the stained glass window, right? And so as Greg's walking around the minstrel gallery, Terry shouts out, "Hey, Greg, turn the light on." "Okay, man." Turns the light on, and he says, and we hear, "Hey, man, there's somebody on the roof." "What?" "There's somebody on the roof, man." We get up and, and run to the back door, and we can hear somebody running through the bushes at the back, and we're all sort of running after him, and I'm just going ruff, 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 and I'm pretending to be a dog, so that'll really scare him, right? And yeah, that was, and then we come back and we all opened another bottle of wine and had a joint, and yeah, it was just fun.
So there really was some kind of intruder.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, no, there was quite a few over that period.
Which is strange because they had the gates in the front to block that.
Yeah, but the fencing was just non-existent.
Right.
It was just brambles and bushes, and anybody could walk onto that estate at any time at that point. All of the grounds were just overgrown. It was derelict.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when Terry found the this wonderful, what do you call it, with all the bushes that are all cut and
No.
I can't remember, getting too old, but Terry sort of got on the ground to look at all the stumps, and then he could see where all these trees were.
Yeah.
And so that was a discovery after a month or so. And then like the Matterhorn, that was just full of rubbish. We spent about a week clearing the stairwell, and because there was a stair going up to it and stuff. So that took about a week of just hacking, and I did a lot of groundwork.
Wasn't George involved with that because he loved gardening so much?
Oh yeah,
and landscaping?
No, George was about, but when they were away during the day, I wasn't in the studios. The Beatles weren't in the studios. George would be doing other stuff. So I was sort of basically living at Friar Park, and George and Patty would be going out somewhere or whatever. They'd be doing whatever. Right. They'd go on holiday or whatever. So we were just left to our own devices at Friar Park. Sweeping rooms out and putting light bulbs in and cleaning windows and polishing. There was a lot of work to do. There really was.
I'll bet. I would love to see a floor plan of Friar Park. I don't know if you know, but a couple of years ago, Yoko had put out a book for the Imagine album, and it had a floor plan of Tittenhurst Park and everything, what every room had, and the gardens surrounding Tittenhurst Park. So you knew everything that was there.
Yeah.
Nothing was hidden. Everything was out in the open. It would be fascinating to know, every room at Friar Park and what it has. And then you've got all the caves. And you witnessed that.
You do have all the caves. Those caves are something else. Yeah, they were, yeah. No, it was a real interesting time. Real interesting time. We had these little monkey bikes, the little Honda things. And it was great because we just spend a morning just poodling around these 24 acres just on these little monkey bikes, just going up and down and around the lakes and things. It was a magical time. We even had Terry even got a couple of go-karts, so we'd be racing up and down the drive. And then going out through the gates, doing a quick turn, and then shooting back up to the house. It was fun. It was an amazing time.
Yeah,
it really was.
I'm sure there are a lot of fans of George who they have their own imagination of what Friar Park must look like based on everything that they've read about it or heard about it, and it must be something, you know, something to behold once you're there.
It's unique. It's
Yeah.
unique.
Yeah.
But when I was there was virtually no furniture.
Mm.
You know, it was literally just empty. You know, it was like Terry eventually found a nice snooker table, and you know, yeah, and over the period, you know, Terry Doran did a lot for the house. You know, building, going out and finding stuff with Patty, and you know, but yeah, so rooms gradually got sort of filled up. You know, over that period. You know,
Yeah.
so.
Did you get to see the writings of Frank Crisp?
The writings.
Yes. He was known for a lot of sayings that he put on the walls in certain areas of Friar Park, and George took
I'm sure
them.
I did. I don't remember them, but
Yeah.
you know, there was a lot to take in. There
Yeah.
really was. You know, yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah,
there was a lot to do.
there's a verse in George's song "The Answers" at the end, which is taken from one of Frankie Crisp's sayings, and also in "Ding Dong Ding Dong." Yesterday, today was tomorrow, and tomorrow, today will be yesterday. That's from Frank Crisp. So he got that from him.
Right.
So how about the Apple Rooftop? Your memories of that?
Well, that was that was, to be honest with you, it was, in my mind, it was just another day.
Mhm.
It was just another Beatle thing, you know, to be honest. It was decided, hey, they're going to do it up on the roof, not in Greece, which was the original thing, which I was quite excited about.
Mhm.
I'm sure you can imagine. Yeah, that'd be good. It was up on the roof. Okay, so the day comes. I start taking the gear up there first thing in the morning, and then I get, it's on Apple had a small lift, right? So I could only really take so much up in the lift.
Okay.
Because Peter Brown would not allow me to overload the lift, because that would kill the lift. You see, so one had to be very careful. Peter
Too much
Brown,
weight. Yep.
yeah, and so, but anyway, got it all up except for Paul's bass stack, speakers. And when you come out the lift, you turn right and then you turn left to go up these little stairs. And there's a banister, and you know, and I tried to get this thing round the corner. Couldn't do it. No way could I do it. So I had to say, Mal, listen, I can't do this. And then he came up and said, no, you're right, you can't do this. And then we looked up and there's a skylight. And so it was, okay, we'll get some rope and we'll just put it straight through the skylight. Okay, cool. So we get the rope and we lift it up, and we can't get it through the skylight by about that much, by about half an inch or so. So the frame has to come out. So we get the frame taken out, then it just goes up. It just fitted. And we had to do the same with Billy's keyboards. Same thing. You know, the speaker just had to go up there. The keyboard bit actually did go round the corner, if I remember rightly, because it was quite thin, but the speakers was, you know, the bass was pretty happy.
Yeah.
So we had to do it that way. And then set it up. And that was it. And then the Beatles came up and, excuse me, sorry. Beatles came up and they did the thing. And John said, bless him, he said, I need a music stand for the lyrics. And my heart sank, because I knew we didn't have any music stands. We didn't have any downstairs. Right? It was a brand new studio. You see, all the music stands that we ever had or were always at EMI.
Right.
So it was like, okay. Panic. And then he needs them holding up. So I'll become a music stand. You know? So, and that's when I couldn't stand, because George was there. See, I knew they were filming, but there was nothing I could do about that.
Right.
You know, George was next to John, then there's Paul, and then there's Ringo at the back, and then so I couldn't stand in front of in front of George like that. I couldn't stand in front of Paul like that, and it seemed logical to me to just kneel down.
Right.
Right, that was the only thing I could do. So I just knelt down and just.
You know, even if you could get a music stand, and I'm sure there must have been a music store right nearby, I would think.
Oh no, it would have taken too long. It would.
Yeah, but it was so windy, it wouldn't have made it. You couldn't have put it on the music stand.
Yeah, well, this is the other thing.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. But that, you know, I just knew that there was no way that you can stop all of this just so I can run and get a music stand. There's no way.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, what a Beatle wants, a Beatle gets. So he got a music stand. It just happened to be me, you know.
Do you realize, Kevin, that you could have changed history? If you had tilted the page just a certain way, if John didn't read the words properly, we could all be singing Dig a Pony very differently right now.
Yeah, well, this is, I like to think that's my professionalism coming in from a 19-year-old.
You did a good job there. You did what was necessary.
Yeah, that was it, really. It's, you know, I did what I had to do, you know.
Did it seem like the band was very disappointed when it was cut short from the Police, or was it like a cool thing to happen in a way?
I think they could have carried on, but you see, I still don't know to this day whether they had any more songs.
That's right. They only did the 5 songs, and they
you
repeated
know,
some of them.
What they might have done is improvised and done a few proper rock and roll songs, which would have been really fabulous. Because they were a good band, Ken. You know, they really were a good band.
I believe you, Kevin.
I used to listen to them in the studios doing like a little bit of Long Tall Sally, or, you know, just sort of warming up in between doing whatever. They'd suddenly go, hey, you know, and then they'd just play an old rock and roll song, and you'd just think, yeah, this is bleeping great, you know, this is this is all right, you know. No, the studios were fabulous. That was, no, that'll live with me forever. I'm sure you know, well, it still is now, isn't it? 50 years on.
Yeah.
Here I am.
I often think about that performance and just knowing that there were certain songs that they repeated, like Get Back 3 times, you know, did they really have other songs ready at that moment? So it's very likely they wouldn't have done more than those 5 songs anyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's the thing, you know, and I'm sure, you know, they repeated the songs because the studio downstairs wanted them to do it again. You know, but I think if they hadn't been stopped, I got a feeling deep inside. Oh yeah, sorry. I got a feeling they would have done a few rock and roll songs. I like to think they would have done, to be honest, because I got this feeling they were enjoying it.
Well, we'll never know.
We'll never know. That's right. Yeah, which is sad, but there you go.
And then there's the Abbey Road album. It really is. It's such a fascinating. Well, everything about the Beatles is fascinating. But when you realize this was the last album that they recorded, and they had all kinds of problems within the group, and they pulled together somehow and created this masterpiece. It's so amazing to think that even at times when they were struggling for various reasons, you know, that they could do something, you know, when they concentrated on the music, like Ringo said.
Like Ringo said.
Yeah, it's just so true. And that whole the medleys on side 2, were just magnificent pieces of work.
I remember that night. I think it was in Studio 3. I think they did that medley. I could be wrong. Some techno is bound to correct me, but if I remember rightly, that was done in Studio 3. I was, but no, I remember that night. That was something else.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we learned from books that have come out and the recent Abbey Road box set is that they recorded like two songs together at a time, and then they strung it together.
Yeah,
So it wasn't like all those songs were conceived the way that it was originally. They all worked together that way.
yeah.
Even Her Majesty was going to be placed in the middle, you know, between Me, Mr. Mustard, and Polythene Pam, I think. But however they managed to do it, like I've
But that
always
was the
said,
genius of
yeah,
it all.
yeah, yeah.
They were. I mean, along with George Martin, they were pretty slick.
Hmm.
They did get it right. All of the time.
Yes, they
Which-
did. And any specific memories you might attach to the Abbey Road album?
Is that when Ringo left?
Ringo left during the White Album.
Why was it? Oh, okay. Yeah, no, yet again, you see, it's all just it's just like a conglomeration of just 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot happened to me in those 2 years. I saw a lot of Beatles songs come together in those 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the studio, it just melds all together. I liken it to being on the road for 9 months. There's nothing specific hits out unless something specific actually enters your brain.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Now, I haven't heard the album for decades. I don't listen to the Beatles, really. I mean, if I did, it'd bring back great memories, but it's, excuse me. So there's nothing specific except for just doing the album cover, really. That was because I, along with Steve Brendel and 2 other people, we were the first people to cross Abbey Road zebra crossing in a line.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's Ethan Russell, was it? Or somebody had the idea of the crossing.
Well, Ian McMillan was the
Ian
photographer.
McMillan, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm talking to somebody that knows. Ian McMillan decided that he needed to show the band what it would look like, what the image would look like.
Right.
So he asked me, and I got Steve, and we got a couple of porters from EMI, and we walked across the studio. We walked across the floor,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, that's pretty neat to know. And having been to Abbey Road and seen the amount of people that walk across it, I kind of dig it that I was the first one to actually walk across in a line.
Do you have the photo of that?
I do. Okay. Yeah, it actually has been. Mark Lewison did a talk, and he got a black and white. I've got a coloured photo, and he got a black and white of it, and he showed it on his show, and somebody took a picture of it, and that's been put out on the internet. So that's out there somewhere. That's
okay. I'll have to hunt that down.
Yeah, I'm in George's position. I'm at the back.
All right. Since you mentioned that you were living at Friar Park, did you spend any time when George was working on All Things Must Pass?
I did. I started All Things Must Pass at EMI, and then Eric came down with Carl Radel, Jim Gordon, and Bobby Whitlock.
Right.
And their tour manager, a guy called Bruce McCaskill, another Liverpudlian, I used to play, I think it was with the Mersey Beats. I think he was a singer with the Mersey Beats.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so we spent sort of many nights just as you do in a studio while the band is in there, just sitting around talking, you know. And I mentioned that I wanted to go on the road, and I had done for a while. Because I used to sit in the studios, you see, while the band were I used to sit up in the lobby with Mal, you know, while the band were in the studios. And you'd have, you know, the Hollies, you know, in Studio 3, or, you know, Pink Floyd, you know, and their roadies would be there. And Mal and their roadies would, you know, start talking about the road and all that. And I'd sit there like this, you know, young, naive kid going, I want that, you know, I want that. I want to do this, you know, I want to go on the road, you know, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go on the road. I needed to go on the road. And Bruce said, well, look, you know, Eric's starting this band and we're going on the road in a bit. Do you want to come on the road with us? And so I quit when Derek and the Dominos, as they now known, left, finished recording with George. I went with them. And yeah, I went on the road.
That must have been an experience.
It was an amazing, absolutely amazing experience. More things happened to me on that tour than 2 years with the Beatles. It was a completely different lifestyle. You know, completely. There was no comparison between working for the Beatles and working for Derek and the Dominos. Yeah.
And when you experienced this being on the road, did you find this is what you've been craving all along to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent 16 years on the road.
Yep.
By the way, but it was nice because Mal got in touch with me and said, "Oh, George is doing a charity concert in New York for Bangladesh. You know, and do I fancy sort of going and doing the back line?" And so I met George again doing concert for Bangladesh, along with Billy and, you know, Klaus Bormann and, you know, all these other people. So yeah, it was that was good. That was the last time I saw George, was a concert for Bangladesh, and that was a good week.
Yeah,
that really was.
Did you work with the other Apple artists while they were there?
I looked after them during when we weren't working. I'd say, like with Doris Troy, you know, I would go into the studios with her and just look after her. You know, there wasn't much to do except get her a bottle of Drambuie every night, right? Or, you know, with Jackie Lomax, you know, went into the studio with him. Same with Mary Hopkins.
Yeah.
Mary Hopkins, you know. Yeah, looked after her, you know. And Billy, I first met Billy when he came over.
Right.
And I took care of Billy, yeah. Billy and I got on really well. That was nice. That really was nice. Lovely man.
Oh, brilliant keyboard player.
Yeah, it was good. The last time I saw him was I was doing a festival somewhere, and he was playing, and yeah, we sort of got together backstage, which was nice.
Were you there for sessions for these artists?
Yeah.
I mean, like you know, George produced Billy Preston and Jackie Lomax and Doris Troy.
Yeah.
So, what was that? Sort of a different feel altogether, because George was a producer and he also played guitar when needed on some songs.
That's the thing. You see, you know, basically, I was looking after George. You know, but I would look after the artist as well, like I would look after George. You know, there was no difference between George and Doris, or George and Jackie,
right?
You know, or Paul and Mary. There was no difference. They were the artists that I was looking after. the band expected me to look after their artists the way I would look after them.
Right.
And
And
so
it seemed like George was the most vested in Apple. He got more involved with Apple artists. Not that the others didn't, but he really took the bull by the horns there. When you think about Jackie Lomax, Doris Troy, Billy Preston, the Radha Krishna Temple, there was so much that he did as a producer
yeah,
and musician, and to some degree songwriter too. So, that must have been an amazing thing to witness this other side of George being a producer.
to be honest, Ken, that sort kind of didn't come into it. I was looking after George, and that's all it was for me, or I was looking after Paul.
Right.
Or I was looking after Ringo on Beaucoup de Blues. Because
What did you do for that album?
Well, it originally started at Abbey Road, those sessions.
Well, I know that's where Ringo met Pete Drake, and Pete asked him if he wanted to come to Nashville.
That was those sessions. And then they persuaded him to actually go to Nashville.
Right.
Right. I mean, like Pete Drake, he was a lovely man. I got on well with him as well, because I would look after them like I would look after Ringo. There was no separation. That's Ringo's band, or that's George's band, so that's my job, is to look after George and his band, or George or Ringo and his band. I remember Pete, because they said I couldn't go to Nashville. You see, this was another reason why I needed to go on the road. See, every time there was any trips anywhere, Mal went, because that was Mal. Mal always looked after the boys,
Right.
He always went away with them, but I never did. So that was another. Towards the end, I was. Excuse me. Towards the end, I was frustrated. Because I wanted to go away. All I was doing was working in studios. On a personal level, it sucked. And then you're working on an album, and then it's, we're going to move to Nashville. Great. Oh, but you're not coming. And it's like, Pete Drake said to me, "I'm sorry, you're not coming, man." Yeah, well, that's the way it goes. So,
Mal couldn't have used you as an assistant.
Well, no, there's no point.
Right.
That's, you see, Mal wouldn't really look after anybody else like he'd look after Ringo. Whereas I would look after everybody else, and Ringo and everybody else. Where Mal's sole aim was just John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Not all these other musicians. They were almost like a periphery with Mal.
Right.
Not in a detrimental way, but just, his main focus was the Beatles. So was mine, but I kind of expanded it that, hey, listen, I'm an equipment manager. You're using equipment. I'm setting it up. This is what I'm setting it up for George. On All Things Must Pass. So, I'm setting up the organ for when oh God, doesn't matter. Leon Russell comes in. So,
okay.
So you're sort of doing all of that. It's just part of the job. And then you're not needed. And that's it's frustrating.
I'm sure.
So when I got the chance to go on the road and just, I had to grab it. And, Mal didn't like it a bit, I don't think, but we were kind of just, by then, you see, there was no Beatles. There was only George. John had done Plastic Ono Band. It's like when he did the Lyceum in London. I didn't even know there was a show. Mal didn't tell me. except Mal rang me up and said, "Oh, doing a show with a Plastic Ono band at the Lyceum. We need a couple of amps. Can you bring them down?" So it was like, oh. So I took the amps down, saw the show, waited till the end of the show, and then took the amps away again. And that was it. It was like, well, you know, there was nothing for me to do. You know, and then once there was only George left, there was like two of us looking after George. You know, and so Mal was almost, I hate to say it, Mal was kind of treating me like his assistant. You know, it was where I hadn't been his assistant. I worked with him. I didn't work for him.
Right.
You know, but now all of a sudden I'm working for him, and it's, you know, there's just, and it might seem a subtle difference, but for me back then, it meant a lot. You know, so yeah.
Did you try to stay in touch with the other Beatles? I know you mentioned George with the concert for Bangladesh.
No, that's the. Sorry, Ken. No, I was not that close with them. And you know, I not would ring them up and go, "Hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm all right." That never happened. You know, if I had to ring them up, it was because of a specific reason. You know, right. Whatever it would be, it would, you know, a question need answer or whatever. So I wasn't as close to them as Mal was. Right. So because he'd grown up with,
yeah.
You know,
he wasn't just an employee, he was family.
Yeah, that's right.
So
yeah, and if you like, I was almost like a distant cousin. You know, it's, you know, had come into the family from a long way away. And it was a privilege, you know, to have been invited and accepted into that real small world, because it was a small world. And I do feel privileged, even after all these years, that I was invited into that.
Right.
And I, you know, that was down to Mal, you know, having faith in me being able to look after his boys. And I guess that half a bag of groceries says to him that, you know, he thinks of the boys, you know, so, you know, so I'm sure you can understand why. Yeah, it was hard leaving, but for me, it had to be done. You know?
Right.
And I spent 16 years on the road. You know, and I've worked with some amazing musicians. That's why now the boys to me are just a wonderful band. You know, as I said, I've worked with many musicians and bands and been on tour with them, and they are the finest. You know, they were the nicest, near enough. You know, they're certainly at the top of my tree. You know, but the problem is, you see, I started at the top and worked down.
Who were the other acts you worked with? Just to give our viewers.
I'll give you some. I'll give you some American ones. There's Ted Nugent.
Okay.
Tina Turner. A couple of tours with her. Motorhead. Judas Priest. Wishbone Ash.
A lot of the heavy metal artists.
Yeah, but also Tommy Cooper. I don't know if you know Tommy Cooper. Okay, no. My all-time favorite. Okay, he was a comedic magician, very famous in England. I grew up watching him and laughing. Petula Clark did Matt Monroe, Hot Chocolate, Leo Sayer, Mahogany Rush, Cheap Trick. There's quite a few more, but off the top of my head, this is just the most famous. You know, Kid Creole and the Coconuts. Yeah, so I did a lot of touring, and it was wonderful. I got my goal, you know. Yeah,
those are some of my favorite artists there. I mean, Petula Clark is one of my favorite singers.
Yeah, that was I did 2 years in the Middle East in like a cabaret sort of circuit where, you know, would work for tour for 2.5 weeks.
Hmm.
You know, doing two shows, maybe 3 shows in a hotel ballroom, and then go to, you know, like in Dubai, and then you go to Abu Dhabi and do the same again. Then you go to Bahrain, do the same again, Sharjah, you know, and then the artists just kept on rolling over. So it was like Hot Chocolate, and then Leo Sayer, and then, you know, and then it just kept on rolling over for about 5 months or so. And yeah, that was, and then after 2 years of that, I was on my way home with, I can't remember who it was. Who did The Streets of London? Ralph McTell.
Oh, great song.
Right. You know, and the last tour I did with him was in the Middle East. And I was just thinking, God, I really do want some heavy metal. So I want some rock and roll, I thought to myself. And an old manager rang me up. He says, hey, Kevin, yeah, Motorhead, I want a job. It was like, oh, God, do I want a job? Do I want a job? Whoa. And I spent 9 months on the road with Motorhead. And that was unbelievable. Oh, if we were talking about Motorhead, I'll give you an hour's worth. Some unbelievable stuff.
You've run the gamut there of so many different genres of music. I mean,
oh yeah, no, everything from comedians to, you know, cabaret to heavy metal to, yeah. Cheap Trick were nice. They were good nights.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've still got upstairs. I've still got a pair of Bunny Carlos's big drumsticks that he uses at the end of the show.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it took me 4 days to persuade him to leave me then when he left the stage. Oh, The Tourists I did as well, which is Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart's band before they became the Eurythmics.
Okay, that's interesting.
So, yeah, funny enough, it was interesting. That's why I know that the Beatles were really the best. You know, and I'll always, you know, and I'll always maintain that they were just a good band. You know, at the end of the day, you know.
Hey, you don't need to convince me. They're four of the most amazing artists of all time, and I appreciate, you know, everything they've done, group and solo. And it's the soundtrack of my life. There's a lot of other artists I love, but they're right in the center of my heart, you know.
Yeah,
so.
That's good. Yeah, they're in my heart as well, I must admit. You know, they really are. There's no band like them. You know, they did for me what, you know, they did for me, you know. And I'm immensely proud of that, I must admit. So
now you put out a book a few years ago, which you might want to show the folks. Who's That Redhead on the Roof? There you go. My Life with the Beatles. There you go. There's proof that your hair was red right there on the front cover.
Yeah, that was done by my daughter, which is, I like that one. And that's on the back. That's on Ringo's drum kit.
Oh, nice.
Mal took that. Mal took that. But it's like that. Sadly, it's only on Kindle at the moment. So, you know, if you know any publishers, I'm quite happy.
I will do whatever I can to help you because you have a tremendous story, and
thank you.
You know, and does your book cover all the other artists that you work with after the Beatles?
No,
strictly the Beatle years.
No, originally it was. Excuse me. No, originally I spent 2 weeks in my shed, I needed to get all of this stuff out of my head. Right. And so I just went, right, okay. Got a tape recorder, just went into the shed and I just spoke for 2 weeks and got it all out of my head, everything. 20 odd years in the music business, just, and then kind of just, it wasn't really a well-written book, as, you know, whoever reads my book will most probably realize, you know, but it told all the stories that I needed to get out. And then what happened was that when Mark Lewison got in touch with me and started speaking about, you know, oh, we're trying to get in touch with you for ages. And want to do an interview because we're doing the Let It Be film, a remake, and wanted to do an interview, for that, like we go on the roof and stuff and talk about that. So I said, yes, okay, did that. And then my wife, about a year later, just thought, I'm going to type in my husband's name with the Beatles and see what happens. And she said, and all this stuff came up, and I was called like a lackey and Mal's assistant, and just a staffer and stuff. And it was like, if I only knew, they really knew what I did, I think I would most probably get a little bit more respect. And the lackey one really hurt me. So in the end, I just said, well, I tell you what, I'll just do a book for the Beatles people. And so I just got the beginning, just 2 years worth of my book, which is basically the Beatles. And I just said, okay, let's just do this for the Beatles fans and, Beatles people. And if they're interested, then, that's fine. And the rest of the world most probably don't know anyway. Don't care. And so that's what happened. I split it up. So, I've got about another 40-odd thousand words written down, especially, a lot of it's Derek and the Dominos and a lot of it's Lemmy.
We'll have to have part two. Part two's got to come out.
Yeah, it's just got to be a bit better written than what it is. I'm not a writer, Ken. This is the problem. It took me ages to convince myself that what I put in the book is how I've said it is, if you met me in the pub and we had a couple of pints, that's how it would come out. I'm not a flowery person. I can't, waft on, describe things and, all of that business. And then I figured, well, if it's just for the Beatles are going to read that, know more about the Beatles than I do. And there's been so much written that I couldn't add anything else. I would just repeating what they've most probably read in half a dozen books. Right. And so it's like, well, no, it's my story. This is not about the Beatles. It's about this 18-year-old, very lucky young man from London, that went to work for the biggest band in the world somehow. And, and it's just my story. It's not theirs.
There is such a thing as book knowledge, and that's very valuable. But there's another thing altogether when you've had personal experience with the Beatles. And that's something no one can take away from you, that all these people who read the books will never know. Yeah. So, there is value in what you have to say. There's value in what anybody who's ever worked with any of the Beatles has to say, whether it's just a little bit of work or quite a lot of impressive work. It doesn't matter. If you were part of their orbit, you matter to a lot of people in this world. So I will definitely put up the link for your book, which right now, as you said, is just on Kindle. Before we go, since I mentioned it at the very start of this interview, what happened with Lulu falling asleep on your shoulders?
Oh, we didn't get that. Oh, yeah.
No.
So
I'm saving the best for last.
Right, we're going to go all the way back. I was told that Klaus and Christine were going to give me a lift back to London.
This is from Brian's party.
Yeah. Okay. And so I get into the car and Klaus says, oh, we're dropping Lulu off as well. So, okay, So I'm sitting in the back and Lulu's sitting just to my left. And after about 15 minutes, she just snuggled up on my shoulder and fell asleep. I tell you, man, what was it then? It would have been 17-year-old to have Lulu sleeping on your shoulder was I could have died and gone to heaven. It was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, that was really good. I reminded her of it a few years ago, years after, when I was working for the boys. Ringo lived up in Hampstead, and it was when she was living with the Bee Gee, Morris.
Yeah.
And I went over there a couple of times to, because I knew Morris, and it was I reminded her of that day. It was that night. Yeah. Yeah, it still sticks with me. That was neat. That was
That's a cool thing.
Yeah, what any 17-year-old would have wanted, man.
Yeah.
I tell you, I had it. Just, on my left shoulder. That's very special shoulder. That's very special.
So no book is coming out, My Life with Lulu?
No, it would only be about a page.
Oh, but what a page.
Oh, what a page. Yeah.
Well, this has been delightful. I want to make sure that I don't forget. I can be very forgetful. Thank you, Plastic EP, for hooking me up with Kevin. Kevin did an interview with Plastic EP, my friend from Australia, who pretty much lives on YouTube. He does interviews every single day. Lots of people in the Beatle world he interviews, and it's because of him that I got to interview Kevin. So I want to thank you, Plastic. And in fact, I'll put up the link for his interview with you. But
thank again. I'd like to thank Plastic again. It was good. It was good. Yeah.
I think he just celebrated 500 shows. I think it was.
Did
He's
he?
done already. Yeah. I'm telling you, he lives and breathes. What's that?
He didn't look old enough.
He's great though. He's got a great personality. He interviews everyone. I mean, people who are in Beatles tribute bands, anyone who's ever worked with any of the Beatles. He's a big Beatles fan. He's a big Monkees fan.
I tell you, I worked with the Beatles tribute band in the Middle East on one of those silly tours.
Okay.
And that was weird. That was really weird. Sitting there listening to a Beatles tribute band playing Beatles music all night. It was kind of cool, I must admit. The Wellington Beatles, I think they call themselves, or the Wellington Beatles. They're sort of Leighton Buzzard band. I don't know what's happening with them, but yeah, that was quite a memorable little tour.
Okay. Actually, were they very good?
Oh yeah. I'm not too sure if there's any Beatles tribute act that isn't good. I think because they all want to be exactly as the Beatles, and so I think they all play to that level of Beatles level. And so I'm not too sure if there's any bad Beatles tribute acts.
Well, I like bands different types of bands. There are bands that try to copy every lick the way the Beatles did it, and that takes an enormous amount of work to do and to pull off. And then there are bands that do their own arrangements of Beatles songs and solo music, and I like that too.
Yeah.
There are bands that I've seen now that just concentrate on the early Beatles period. There are some that do just solo music, or just solo Paul McCartney. I love the variety of all that. Some of them dress up like the Beatles in Beatles suits. Some of them just wear jeans and a t-shirt, and I like it all.
Yeah, I've seen it. There's in London. I did got invited to the 50th anniversary of the concert on the roof at Saville Road.
Nice.
And there was a couple of people there playing Beatles music, and it was it doesn't matter if it's on on an acoustic. It's wonderful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It is timeless music, and I do enjoy it.
Yeah, no argument there. Hopefully it'll be music that'll live on forever.
I think it will. Let's just hope ever is for a long time.
Yeah.
In this day and age.
Kevin, this has been total joy, and thank you for spending all this time with me. And let's stay in touch. We're going to try and get your book out there in physical format.
Ken, I want to thank you very much. It's been wonderful. As you now realize, I could talk for hours about it, and there's so many stories that they're the little tangents that don't mean anything to anybody except me. But anyway.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
After we stop recording, then maybe we will talk for some more hours.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't want to subject you to that, but
No, I'm not doing anything, but whatever you want to do.
okay. Well, thank you for doing this, and thanks to all of you for watching. And we'll see you next time. Peace and love.